Chapter 15. London, England. September 7th. It was a bit hazy that Saturday afternoon, the temperature warm, but not uncomfortably so. Marie-Christine Fontaine sat reading Milton in the parlor on the first floor of the building on Great Russell Street. On the other side of the room, the ancient Trevor Kenningston played what seemed an eternal game of chess against Sir Nigel Rathbone, who sputtered and fooled his spectacles and blew out a blast of brandy-scented air every time his opponent made a move. In the corner, the pendulum on the grandfather clock ticked slowly back and forth. They were generals in a war, all three of them. Their troops were, for the most part, rallied about them in that very same building, waiting for word, waiting to be deployed, waiting for an attack. The armory had been raided. There were no weapons on the walls for decorative purposes any longer. All had been cleaned and honed for use. Axes, crossbows, stakes, swords, and even guns. There was no way to be certain what form the attack would take, but they were certain it would come. Marie-Christine had never approved of the use of seers. Their predictions were so vague, but in this instance she was grateful that the council had several in its employ. From somewhere upstairs came the sudden but pleasant distraction of violin music. One of the girls played, though she could not recall which. John could have told her. Young Travers seemed to have appointed himself personal guardian and protector of the slayers-in-waiting, though their watchers fancied that post for themselves, of course. He had taken a particular liking to the Swiss girl, Ariane de la Croix. Marie-Christine approved. The girl was headstrong, but competent and dignified. A bit young for John, but time would pass. It always did. Only this afternoon, it seemed to be passing at a snail's pace.
"Checkmate,"
wheezed old Kenningston.
"Damn you, Trevor!"
Sir Nigel cursed.
"How can you be half blind and still beat me at chess?" "Goes to show how awful you are at, old chap,"
Kenningston snickered, took hold of his wolf's head cane, and rose to his feet. Grinning, he walked away with more energy than he had when he had sat down for the game.
"Where are you going? It's only just begun,"
Sir Nigel called after him.
"Tea. Got to have a nice cup of tea. Since none of the help have bothered to offer one, I thought I'd best go make it myself."
Her book held up to hide her face, Marie-Christine smiled. Sir Nigel cursed loudly several times.
"Up for a game, then, Mademoiselle Fontaine?"
he asked at length, forcing a lightness into his tone that she suspected was feigned so as not to frighten her off. She lowered the book. "Thank you for offering, Sir Nigel, but I think not. Chess has never been my game, I'm afraid."
"Precisely the point, my dear,"
Sir Nigel revealed. Marie-Christine smiled, but made no move to rise. She heard voices in the foyer and looked up to see the Spanish girl, Isabel, speaking with one of the operatives on sentry. After a moment, Isabel smiled sweetly at the man and entered the parlor. "Excuse me, Miss Fontaine," she said, her English much improved in the brief time since she had arrived in London. "You said about the books." "Of course," Marie-Christine replied. "Come in, Isabel." She had nearly forgotten her offer to lend the girl several books so that she could continue to work on her language skills. She slipped a finger into Paradise Lost to keep her place and stood up as Isabel approached. Just then there was a ruckus in the foyer as the front door was thrown open and the operative's guardian shouted in response, "Back up, you idiot, and let me in!" The voice belonged to John Travers.
"You gave us a shock, Travers, that's all. You should know better, tense as things are around here,"
chided one of the operatives. "You want shock, Williams," John retorted. "Take a look out the front door." Marie-Christine glanced at Sir Nigel. As one, they moved swiftly into the foyer with young Isabel in tow. When she saw John's eyes, Marie-Christine felt tendrils of fear encircle her heart. The young watcher turned to Williams. "Get everyone on the upper floors to come downstairs. Interior rooms only. Stay away from the windows. Move, now!" The two operatives started up the stairs, 2 and 3 steps at a time, calling out loudly for everyone in the building to move. John turned to Sir Nigel then. "With all due respect, Sir Nigel, whatever magical protections we have available to us, now would be the time to use them." "My God, John!" Marie-Christine rasped. "What is it?" In response, Travers simply reached for the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. She followed, Sir Nigel behind her. Her first thought was that the sky had begun to darken rather earlier than she had expected. Then she turned her eyes heavenward. German aircraft filled the sky, blotting out the sun. Layer upon layer of them, 1.5 miles high, and as far as the eye could see, hundreds of enemy planes, like a plague of locusts, so many that the entire eastern horizon was covered with them, a curtain being drawn across the sky. "Merciful Lord," Marie-Christine whispered. Then the bombs began to fall. Galdhøpiggen, Norway, September 7th. Though the wind howled across the face of the mountain, in its stone bowels all was silent save for the whimper of captive humans who had yet to achieve the good fortune of death. In the main chamber of his stronghold, Skrymir sat upon the bone and ice throne that had been constructed for him in another age, and fumed impatiently. The many guests who benefited from his generosity had been instructed in no uncertain terms that they would not be welcome over this long afternoon and evening. Hedonists that they were, they had taken that as a cue of the previous night to engage in even more debauched revelry than was common for them. All for the better, Skrymir thought. Most of them were still in their guest quarters recovering. His servants had been instructed to see to them in his absence, should he be gone for very long. The demon doubted that would be the case, however. Everything had gone as planned. If all went well, he would return long before the next dawn, with a great deal of blood on his hands and news that would cause a celebration like no other. It was a thought that should have brought a smile to his icy features, but he was tired of when and if and how. Skrymir had proven himself infinitely patient over the course of many, many centuries. But now that one of the vital components of his dream was about to come to fruition, he allowed himself the luxury of frustration and impatience. Flames flickered in metal lanterns that hung from the ceilings. In their cages, the 2 or 3 surviving humans groaned. The mindless demon he had imprisoned had died days before, but he could not spare a thought for new entertainment. Not now. In a way, the silence in the enormous ice-columned chamber was astonishing. 12 gnarled Nidavellir knelt in a half-circle around Skrymir's throne, iron breastplates gleaming, 2-headed war axes sharp and at the ready. Though they were fully awake and alert, their eyes were closed and their breathing slow and steady as they meditated before battle. Skrymir had used his ability to manipulate the ice to enlarge his scrying glass. It stood 20 feet from his throne, 8 feet high and 8 feet wide. Around its base, the ice had built up so that it would not topple and shatter. That would be disastrous. To that end, his servants had been instructed to keep the guests out of that chamber, and he had set loose his griffin to pad around the enormous room and to kill anyone who entered it without his permission. The massive creature had the head, wings, and forelegs of an eagle, with the body, tail, and hind legs of a lion. It was not the most intelligent beast he had ever seen, but it would serve to guard over the scrying glass until Skrymir's return. The glass, or rather, the icy window through which he magically observed the goings-on in the meeting chambers at the Watchers' Council headquarters in London. He had stared at that frozen surface for days upon days now, had received reports from his agents all over the world, monitoring their efforts as well as the progress of the war in Europe. Now, beyond the glass, he could see 4 of the young girls, the slayers-in-waiting. There was a man there as well, a watcher. 2 of the girls were talking and laughing, smoking cigarettes. A third lay in bed reading. The 4th argued with the watcher at the far end of the room, though Skrymir could not make out the words. They did not matter, of course. Shortly, they would all be dead. The time had come. The Germans were about to bomb London. Skrymir knew the moment was at hand, but as the seconds and minutes ticked by, he grew more agitated. Without him even truly being aware of it, his body endured subtle changes. His wings ruffled and crackled, the frozen edges growing sharper. The jagged spears of ice that hung beneath his arms and jutted from his elbow and back lengthened and sharpened. Within his icy form, the glowing green mist that was the core of him churned with the tumult of his anticipation, growing and extending. His talons and teeth grew longer as well. One by one, the Nidavellir opened their eyes, sensing the change in their master. They were an ancient race, and he their even more ancient god. They were perfectly attuned to his needs and commands, and eager to spill blood in his name as their ancestors had done, the blood of his enemies, and their own as well. Suddenly the chamber echoed with shouting and a loud but muffled bang. The sounds were from entire nations away, filtered through the ice window of the scrying glass. Skrymir narrowed his eyes and gazed at the scene unfolding within the council headquarters. The door to the converted meeting room had been thrown open. A man stood in the doorway shouting that the slayers-in-waiting and the other watchers should follow him, but they had to take cover. The German planes were attacking. Perfect. Ever since the war in Europe had begun, and the fierceness of the German war machine revealed itself, Skrymir had known that it was only a matter of time before the Nazis bombed London. A happy coincidence. His plan would have worked without, but now not only were his targets all in one place as he had arranged, but their world was in chaos, the bombing creating utter pandemonium. Now was the time to strike. He watched with pleasure as the girls looked up in astonishment. Before they had time to react, the building shook slightly and the sound of explosions could be heard in the distance. The girls, these humans trained to one day perhaps take up the mantle of Slayer, screamed. All 4 of them shrieked in naked fear and rushed for the door, the male watcher following along behind them. "Now," Skrymir growled, "follow me." With a single flap of his mighty wings, green mist swirling within his icy frame, Skrymir propelled himself from the throne and landed with a crunch upon the stone floor of the chamber. He stood before the scrying glass and allowed himself a moment to gloat. "Now," he whispered to himself, "now it begins." Skrymir touched the ice, staring through the window as the girls ran from the room in a panic. With the tiniest mental command, the ice withdrew, seeming to melt away to the edges of the scrying glass. Instantly he felt the warmth of that room in London, so far away, close enough to touch, for the window on the other side had also disappeared, the ice opening to allow his master to pass. He had created this window, this passage, before the council had installed wards against magic at its headquarters, and had replenished it time and time again. It was a hole in their defenses, likely the only one. But Skrymir will only need one. With a roar, the ice demon lunged forward, again powered by the strength of his wings. A rush of frigid mountain air swept along with him, as Skrymir entered the 4th floor meeting chamber at the headquarters of the Watchers' Council as easily as moving from one room to the next. With a clamor of grunts and snarls and war cries in a language not heard by human ears in generations, the Nidavellir followed, leaping down from the window to the wooden floor with a thunder of heavy boots. Skrymir bellowed once more, a throaty roar of pleasure. The council building shuddered again with a pulse of falling bombs, and explosions continued to erupt in the city outside, the devastation matching his own urge toward destruction. Skrymir took only one glance at the room. After all, he was intimately familiar with it after all this time, with the meetings that had once been held here, and with the girls who now bedded down there each night. The huge table, thrust into a corner, the chairs piled atop it, the cots and bedclothes, the girls' things, the weapons of their training. One blink, and he had seen enough. The demon turned for the door through which the girls and their watcher had raced only moments before. Skrymir allowed his right arm to dangle by his side as he moved, and the ice shifted and reformed, talons becoming scythes. Cots shattered as he brushed past them, and the Nidavellir were no more cautious. He could hear the German planes flying, could even hear the British RAF pilots firing at them as the bombs fell. Fires already burned across the city, and the scent of the blaze came to him, swirled with the wind from his mountain stronghold that still blew through the open passage. It was chaos, beautiful and pure. Skrymir reached the doorway and slammed through it, tearing the door off its hinges and shattering the flame, sending splinters of wood flying into the corridor beyond. From there he could see down the stairs, where the watcher who had been the last of them to leave was still hurrying to what he thought would be safety. "Good Lord!" the watcher cried, choking out the words. With a thrill racing through him, the mist that was his essence swirling within, Skrymir crashed through the railing above the stairs and swept down upon the watcher. He brought the scythe fingers of his right hand down and sliced the man clean through with each one. Chunks of flesh and bone slapped to the stairs and thumped down several steps. Farther below there was even more screaming. Several of the slayers in waiting were near enough to see what had happened. On the 3rd floor landing, a pair of watchers stood slack-jawed, staring in horror and awe. Skrymir gloated for a moment at the weaponless fools. They leaped for the girls. As the Nidavellir trumped down the stairs in his wake, Skrymir extended a single spear of a finger and spiked it through the skull of the nearest girl. She did not have time to scream. With a rustle of his wings, he lifted her up and then dropped her to tumble down the stairs. "Kill them!" Skrymir howled. "Kill them all!" Outside the buildings on Great Russell Street, the bombs continued to fall. Within, the screams grew louder. Ice started to form on the walls, and the blood began to flow. Copenhagen, Denmark, September 7th. It pained Sophie to walk the streets of Copenhagen and to feel the city's broken spirit. To an outsider, it would barely be noticeable. The German soldiers were armed at present, of course, but beyond that, the world moved along. Autos still ran, businesses did business, even restaurants and beer houses were still open. But a cloud of oppression, the knowledge that they were no longer free, the royal family no longer ruled the Kingdom of Denmark, hung over Copenhagen like the smoke from a funeral pyre. The Slayer would not bow to that oppression. She would do nothing unwise, nothing to compromise herself or Yenna or their mission, but she walked with her head high, bolstered by the nobility and dignity of her ancestors. There was still day, and she risked being discovered. Beneath her long coat, on the strap that went around her neck and shoulder, she wore the scabbard and carried her father's sword proudly. They had been there for 2 days. The night before, she had been forced to kill a pair of Nazi soldiers in order to prevent her own arrest. Sophie felt no remorse. Seeing her city this way, for the first time she truly felt as though they were fighting 2 wars simultaneously. I cannot afford to lose either. As she moved serendipitously along a narrow street not far from the river, she vowed to herself that when Spike and Drusilla were dead, or the council decided the crisis was over, she would see to Yenna's condition and state of mind, and then return to Copenhagen and use her skills against the Nazis. For king and council, she had always said, but the kingdom had always come first in that phrase. When the Germans had been defeated, she would return to do the council's bidding, but not until. She paused and turned away for Yenna to catch up. Sophie had urged her to remain at Ilsa Skovgard's apartment. They had arrived in Copenhagen to find the girl missing, but no one knew what had become of her. She's a ballerina of some repute, apparently, despite her youth, but she was also a Jew, and many thought she might have tried to flee in secret as many Jews had done, now that Hitler's barbaric treatment of the Jews made it unsafe for them in any German-occupied land. Sophie was uncertain. Ilsa might have fled, but if so, why do it without notifying the council, who would certainly have helped her? And where had her watcher gone? No, it seemed more likely that vampires had gotten to the girl, but Spike and Drusilla had never been subtle before. Yenna had been pursuing the issue of the underground, and the escape of Jews from Denmark. Meanwhile, Sophie did what she had been chosen to do. She hunted vampires. There were surprisingly few to be found, and she knew it was not merely because she had slain Gorm earlier that year. Many of them had left the city to avoid the German soldiers. Others, those hardier, or more foolhardy, had stayed simply to prey on German soldiers. In 2 nights, Sophie had dusted 3. None of them had a clue about Ilsa or about Spike. But the last one had mentioned another vampire, an ancient giant of a leech named Thorvald. "Are you ready?" she whispered to Yenna. With her hair a bit wilder than usual, stray strands flowing around her face after breaking free of her tight braid, Yenna seemed more than a little out of sorts. But she merely pressed her lips into a thin line of grim focus and nodded. After all that had happened, and now this latest bit of information withheld, a wall had been built up between them. Sophie still felt responsible for Yenna, but she did not know if the gulf that had been created between them would ever be bridged again. I should have forced her to stay behind, Sophie thought grimly, but it was too late for regrets. Sophie swept her long blonde tresses back with one hand and unsheathed her sword with the other. She traced the ancient symbols inscribed there with the tips of her fingers and closed her eyes for a moment of silent prayer. "Let's go." When she moved to the rear door of the squalid flat that Thorvald had been said to live in, Yenna was right behind her. With a single kick, Sophie smashed in the door. It hung loose on its frame and she rushed into the room, illuminated only by the grey light filtered through the clouds outside. It took a moment for her eyes to adjust. "Yenna, stay still," she rasped. On the other side of the rotting, damp, and fetid room stood a massive, long-haired, red-bearded vampire. From the description she had been given, she knew it must be Thorvald. The vampire held Ilsa Skovgard by her dark hair with one hand. Thorvald's features were rigid and cruel. His eyes glowed yellow in the dark, and he clutched her belly with his free hand, holding her against him. Ilsa was weeping openly and copiously.
"You are the Slayer,"
Thorvald said in Old Danish.
"I managed to avoid you all the time you were here before."
"And yet now you confront me without fear." Thorvald only smiled, and the expression was that of an old wolf's through the heavy beard. "Ilsa, you'll be all right," she told the girl. The tiniest glimmer of hope flashed in Ilsa's eyes. Then Thorvald dipped his face to her neck, ripped her throat out with one quick snap of his powerful jaws, and spat out the torn flesh. He leaned forward to let the girl's hot blood pump into his face, and he opened his mouth so that it spattered on his tongue. Yenna screamed and went to rush the vampire, crossbow raised. Sword in her right hand, Sophie held out the other to stop her. Disgust and hatred filled her. Rage enveloped her soul, but she kept her cool. Yenna's safety was paramount. Something more than murder was happening here. Sophie took several cautious steps towards Thorvald, and the vampire had such arrogance that he did not even pause in his drinking of Ilsa's blood. "I'm not even going to cut your head off for that, Thorvald," she snarled at him. "Instead, I'll cleave your arms and legs from your body and leave you a mewling, helpless, starving thing. A creature to be despised even by others of your kind." That got the vampire's attention. It even seemed to unnerve him. Then Thorvald's gaze ticked past Sophie, and he smiled as though relieved. Though alarmed, she dared not turn her back on him, until she heard the voice. "Bloodthirsty little bitch, aren't you?" She knew that voice. Spike. Sophie spun, ready to attack, knowing that Yenna would loose a crossbow bolt at Thorvald in the same instant, that together they would prevail. This was what she had come for, to destroy Spike once and for all. But Yenna would never release the bolt. She no longer held the crossbow. Spike had her by the throat, from behind, and the image of Thorvald tearing out Ilsa's throat was too fresh in Sophie's brain for the Slayer to do anything but freeze, even for only a moment. Spike smiled sweetly. His eyes seemed to have illumination unto themselves. His white hair shone almost like a halo. "How did you follow? It's the middle of the day." Sophie studied him, trying to hide the fear she felt for Yenna, trying not to see the way her watcher slumped into Spike's arms, as though surrendering to a destiny she had accepted long ago. "Fight him, damn you," Sophie thought. Yenna would not meet her gaze, but Sophie could see that her eyes looked empty, hollow. She was nothing but a marionette now in the vampire's clutches. "Looks like rain," Spike explained. "Nice and cloudy. And down this end of town, the buildings are close together. Lots of alleys. Convenient, actually. You can walk about all day down here." Spike kissed Yenna's cheek, but gripped her throat even more tightly. "Simple enough to get you both where I wanted you," he said. Then his voice dropped to a whisper. "And you, Yenna, did you think I'd forgotten you? Your man Edgar was a pebble in my boot, dearest. He needed to be removed. And you were so sweet then. Took me a bit to recall why I knew your face. But came to me. Got a hell of a memory, I do." Yenna only whimpered softly. Her mouth opened into a tiny O, and her eyes locked on Spike's. She looked almost as though she thought he might kiss her. "Let her go!" Sophie cried, bringing her sword up again, ready to attack. Spike thought about it a moment. Then he shrugged. "Sorry, but no." With a grunt, he spun Yenna and slammed her head into the wall hard enough that she slumped down in his grasp, unconscious. But Spike did not drop her, nor did he slow down. Instead, he hauled her up with all his vampiric strength, threw her over his shoulder, and sprinted out into the dingy gray light, sun blotted out by the clouds. He kept his shadows thrown by the buildings, even though it was overcast, taking no chances. The urge to follow Spike, to save Yenna, was so powerful that Sophie did not turn in time. She knew Thorvald was there, felt his evil presence in the way of him as he lunged for her. The huge vampire drove her to the ground beneath him, grabbed her by the hair, and moved in to bite her. She still gripped her sword, but could not manage an effective blow, trapped as she was.
"I will not run from you,"
Thorvald snarled. Raging like an animal herself, Sophie darted her own head up and sunk her teeth into the flesh of Thorvald's cheek, tearing at it with her incisors. They were not fangs, but they tore flesh. Thorvald screamed in surprise and pain, and Sophie bucked him off, then leaped to her feet, bringing her sword around again. "Where?" the Slayer demanded. "Tell me where he's taken her, and I'll spare you."
"The lair of your old enemy,"
Thorvald said immediately, hand clapped to his wounded face, staring at her still as though she were the monster rather than he. For just a moment they faced each other, Sophie breathing hard more from fury than exertion.
"You're not going to spare me, are you?"
the vampire asked, resigned. The blade of her ancestors whistled through the air in a clean arc. Thorvald's head bounced once on the filthy floor before turning to dust along with the rest of him.